Affairs, and something came across my inbox the other day, and it was an article by what's called Claire's Place Foundation. It's an organization for people with cystic fibrosis, which is an ongoing chronic illness. And they had started an employment initiative, and there are huge barriers for employment for individuals with cystic fibrosis, specifically due to long hospitalizations and the fluid nature of the condition. And it kind of got me thinking, because I know here at the same task force, our discussion is generally focused on more static disabilities and static disability accommodations. So, like for instance, adjustable desks for wheelchair users, or maybe like a different approach to trainings or interviews for individuals with intellectual disabilities. But I haven't really heard a conversation about maybe accommodating chronically ill individuals or individuals whose disabilities look different by the day. And really, whenever we talk about dynamically disabled individuals, it's not what we think of whenever we think of a person with a disability, right? So, for instance, I'm chronically ill myself, my disability changes by the day. So, the presentation, what I'm able to do, sometimes changes by the hour. Some days I'm on a ventilator, IV infusion feeding tube, only have an hour functioning a day, can't really make sentences the rest of the day. And then maybe the next week, I don't need any of that equipment and I'm able to attend professional meetings like this. And people with chronic illnesses are often overlooked in employment conversations because a lot of them don't identify with the disability community. Rather, the mindset is, I'm someone healthy who just got sick. And so these individuals aren't really identified in the service systems that we usually utilize to identify your disabled population, like LRS and OCDD, because these organizations are more marketed and targeted towards disability and not chronic illness. And it's also sometimes difficult to find employment just because of the complex nature of fluid health conditions. So I think it's really important for us to start having conversations on how to accommodate people with more fluid health conditions, fluid illnesses, fluid disabilities. So a couple things that, whenever we're considering employing people with these sorts of conditions is, they may have long hospitalizations, which means like fluid work hours or fluid work environments. So sometimes they may be able to work in the office, sometimes it may be virtual. And through the COVID pandemic, we now understand that not everything has to be in person. Virtual does work too. These conditions may be incredibly fluid, like I mentioned earlier. Function may depend on the day, by the hour, by the week. Accommodations may change as well because the condition itself is fluid. So the accommodations also, in turn, have to be fluid. So this is really a task in creativity and trust and respect between the employer and the employee. I mean, the employer has to trust the employee that they're giving accurate reports of their health, because I can see how it could be very confusing for maybe an able-bodied individual to kind of wrap your brain around, okay, one day you're not able to get out of bed, but the next you're able to go to the grocery store and attend a meeting. And the only reason why I know this must be confusing is sometimes it's confusing for us chronically ill individuals too. It's very, can be very surprising to see how your abilities change day by day. But the employee also has to trust the employer that, your reports about your health will be honored and respected too. And then even just trusting that, you don't have to divulge every detail about your health either, because we know that as people with disabilities, we're expected to bear our story to everyone, right? To support coordinators for waiver services, to doctors, to physicians, it's like, tell your story. And that can be so exhausting. It can be a very vulnerable position to be placed in. Another factor to consider is that whenever you employ chronically ill individuals, it's not always a get better soon. We often think as illness as a temporary condition, but with chronic illness, it is chronic. It lasts potentially forever. And so it's just about valuing the employee for where they're at versus valuing the employee with the expectation of them getting better, not how their health could, potentially improve. So these are just a couple, pointers for employing people with chronic health conditions. And I think it's a really important discussion for us to start having because, chronic illness is very prevalent in this day and age, and it is part of the whole conversation about disability. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, any questions, comments, concerns.
I find the same is true on a lot of people that might not have classified chronic illness. Even individuals that are my clients that have, you know, spinal problems or back issues, mental health, any issue or disability. I mean, I have a disability as well. You know, it's by nature, it's not stable. You know, and there are going to be times where the unexpected happens, you know, so I think that's really wonderful. You being able to express that so well, you know, and I think it really, like you said, it depends on the individual. That's what we need to focus on instead of the disability, you know.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. I mean, every disability kind of sometimes will throw a wild card into the equation, right? I mean, I know that there's times that I've had to call or text Miss Bambi and be like, "Hey, look, I'm not going to be able to work this week. I'm on the way to the hospital." And I literally gave her like a 5 minute notice, right? And that's just because I had a 5 minute notice. Like I can be perfectly functional in the next 48 hours being critical condition. But you know, a lot of employers may see this as a negative. However, you know, this can also bring a positive to the table as well, because, you know, people with chronic illnesses or disabilities that may change over time or are more fluid tend to be a little bit more innovative, because we have to figure things out on the fly and very, very quickly too. We got to figure out how to make it work, and we got to figure out how to make it work very quickly. So sometimes this is actually a benefit where, okay, yes, I may be hospitalized frequently. And yes, there may be days where I literally can't get out of bed or make sentences. But because of this, my time management is fantastic. So this is something to definitely take into consideration whenever we're having this discussion.
And I think too, it's finding the right positions for people. I always tell my clients that's key. They come in, I want a job, I'll do anything. I'm like, well, we need to focus more on the environment. And I always tell them when they go for the interview, how do you feel? Because we want to set you up in a supportive environment for success. We don't want to set you up where this is going to be a problem. Most people go into a job, their focus is on financial, making money. And people, especially those that have acquired a disability, you need to refocus your work values, I tell them, too. And we kind of do that as well. And I find it's really good, you know, to focus on environment, and have those conversations as well.
I love that perspective, and I love that way to tackle the situation. I actually had a conversation with my dad last night. He is a manager at a catering ambulance. He's very matter of fact guy, very regimented, right? And I was like, what advice would you give to employers who are considering hiring individuals with fluid health conditions or chronic illnesses? And you know, his answer kind of surprised me, but it was very similar to what you said, is find that niche, find what they're really good at that may not be time sensitive. So like, let's say, okay, you have a bad day, it can wait till the next day, and there's no issue with that, right? And I love what you said about work environment too, because that also is a huge contributor to health. Because whenever we're talking about, you know, unstable health, a lot of things can be factors in that health condition, right? And environment is a huge factor. And so work environment can indeed impact an employee's health. So like I would do better on, you know, doing virtual work versus in person just because of the energy demands. So it's just this really, it just depends on that employee, like you said. So I thank you for that awesome input.
In a number of the training classes I've had for supervisory personnel, they've talked about unexcused absence, or sorry, unplanned absences. I'm just wondering how civil service deals with this situation where it becomes an unplanned absence related to a disability like this.
Ms. Bambi, you want to take that one?
I am not the expert on civil service, but maybe one of our HR people, we don't have anyone from civil service on, but maybe one of our HR people can talk about.
Hey, yeah, civil service does have a rule with unscheduled absences where a person can be non-disciplinarily dismissed. I want to say it's after the seventh absence, at seventh unscheduled absence. So I think that requires 24 hours notice, or at least one workday's notice. And Lillian, from what I'm hearing, sometimes that's not possible. With the fluid conditions, a challenge, but also something I don't think is insurmountable, something I think we could all work together, and maybe with your putting all these good brains together, we could come up with something that might work. And I think you're right. It is, a lot of it will be about environment and finding that right job for that person. A correctional officer who has to be here at 6 o'clock and not at 6:05 maybe is not the right niche, but maybe there's something else within the department that someone with a fluid health condition could do. So I think it's just conversations, and let's have the conversation and let's talk about it, and let's throw some ideas out there, and maybe we can find something that actually works and helps people with fluid health conditions to be able to be employed.
Absolutely. And I think it's definitely a conversation worth having, because I mean, that's a huge barrier to employment, and also probably a barrier to even consideration of employment. Because I know for me, I completely expect, I expect to go into the hospital at least once a year. That's just a given, because my body is just so unstable. And so I know, like, okay, if it was like up to 7 hospitalizations a year, I can't control that. And like you said, I don't, like, my body doesn't give me a week notice in advance of, okay, hey, by the way, you're going to go septic next week. Like, that's not how it works. And if I could choose not to do that, I would, because it sucks. But it would definitely be a huge barrier to employment, or even consideration of employment, for individuals who know, okay, I go into the hospital a lot. And I also know that most of the time it is completely unexpected. And sometimes I don't even have a 24-hour notice. Sometimes it's more like a 3-hour notice. And that it's a really wild way to live, but that's the way some people do live. And so that conversation, I think, like you said, is so important, because it's going to be a huge barrier, a huge issue to employment for these individuals.
And I'm thinking maybe the key to this may be job carving. And maybe ongoing job carving. If we talk to our departments and we see if there's an unfilled need, come up with a list of something that your department is struggling, the goals that your department want to reach, or things like that may not fit in those civil service categories of clerk 1, clerk 2, clerk 3. Maybe somebody like Lillian or like me could help fill that. Somebody with a condition that you're not there every day, or you're there most of the days, but if, like Lillian says, you're pretty predictable, but maybe once a year, there'll be a week unplanned, and I think we all, civil service awesome in that it has those categories, but I know in every department's different, and we all have issues that we're trying to meet, or things that don't really fall. We all need help, that maybe, we could do some kind of job carving or something. I don't know. That was just my.
And it's definitely a great point of just finding what works for the individual, because I think the general assumption is that, people with chronic health conditions may be less of a valuable employee, right? But like Lauren said, we all have times where the unpredictable happens, the unexpected happens, and we are not really able to give a notice of a week. of, hey, something really terrible happened, I'm going to have to leave work for a week or two, right? But really, it's just about focusing on what the individual can bring to the table versus, what they lack, because it may just be 1 week a year where they're hospitalized, but the rest of the year they're fairly predictable just because they know their body. So it's just trying to figure out how to make it work. And really, it's an accessibility issue of figuring out how to make it work and being a little bit more understanding when the unpredictable does happen. It's really about accessibility for people with chronic illnesses, even though it's not what we typically think of as accessibility.
Right. So I think the way the state kind of currently handles that is through FMLA. From chronic illness, they get FMLA, and that's kind of how they deal with those absences. And those absences, would not fall into that 7 unexcused absences where you could non-disciplinarily dismiss someone.
Tanisha.
But I
Tanisha.
love the way the conversations that help us think about. Yeah.
Your
Can you hear me?
audio is
Oh.
yeah, it's really breaking up, but it's you're talking about FMLA, and that's where those absences are used.
I'm sorry,
Right.
y'all. I'm at Angola, which is in the middle of nowhere. So I probably have really sketchy service. But yeah, I was just saying that right now, FMLA is how we would handle that within state government, right? So if someone has a chronic illness, they get FMLA potentially each year. And those absences would stop the person from being non-disciplinarily dismissed after the 7th absence. But I love that we're thinking about this differently. And I would think that maybe we could have a conversation with civil service that says, okay, if someone has and you'll have to excuse me because I'm learning these terms, right? But has a fluid illness, that would not apply to them or something to that effect. I'm sure there's some conversation we can have to decide how we move forward with being able to help in this regard.
I think we need to keep in mind that FMLA also requires prior approval. So there's a process issue here.
That's a great point.
I'm not sure what I understand about prior approval. I guess.
If I'm going to take leave, whatever
Mhm.
kind of leave I want to take,
Right. If
you have
FMLA
to get approval from your supervisor.
was correct, a supervisor normally approves leave. But for FMLA purposes, that's a federal law, and every employment agency, if the individual meets the other earmarks for FMLA, the need for leave is seen as a serious health condition by a healthcare provider deciding on that. If they have been employed continuously with the same employer for a year, and they've worked 1,250 hours in the previous 12-month period, then really that is a right and an eligibility the employee has to leave. And for a supervisor, when all of those things have come to play, employee has been provided appropriate notice, is really not something an employer can deny. I know at our agency, we would not deny that. And I would just reiterate, what Tanisha was saying as far as that unscheduled absence rule with civil service that does exist. And it's not discipline, it's a non-discipline removal. That is not something when FMLA is applicable, that does not apply. That is not an unscheduled absence. If the employee and individual has an FMLA covered condition and the reason for the absence is an FMLA reason, that does not count for an unscheduled absence. And I do think that this is really about us as employers, in agencies on providing this. I can say that for DCFS, the unscheduled absence policy is rarely used at our agency because you know, those protections as it relates to FMLA, accommodations, sick leave that if staff and employees have available, you know, that's just not a go-to for our agency. You know, that's not the direction we're trying to take with having employees that are supporting our mission and providing adequate service for us and that relationship we have with our employees.
I can say the same for Department of Natural Resources. We have individuals that have FMLA approved, and once they get a doctor certification, they'll give us an expectation of, you know, they may have so many absences within a month, you know, that last 1 to 4 days, you know, per episode. And as long as those unscheduled absences fall within what the doctor said is normal for their condition, they're not going to have any issues with us. And, you know, we're only going to look at the unscheduled absence policy if it's non-medical absences. So if they're chronically late and they say they overslept, they, you know, don't come back from their lunch break in a timely manner, things of that nature. It's not going to be because they have medical conditions that are the reason for the unscheduled absence.
Bambi.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Ken. So this is a very rich discussion. I want to thank Lillian for bringing this topic before us, and this is very timely. There is, you know, when I was thinking about this, we sort of, and I'm just speaking from the perspective of public sector VR. You know, we do. For the most part, and this is just my opinion, my perception, we've gotten to a place where we like stability. We like predictability. You know, years ago, when you look at the VR legislation, the needs of the individual reigned supreme. You know, that it was all about the needs of the individual and helping with employment opportunities that were consistent with the individual's strengths and challenges and so on and so forth. And so that prevailed for years. And then it got to a point where we started talking about this dual customer approach, that yes, we provide services to the individual, but on the flip side is that we have to also look at the employer, business, industry, so on and so forth, as a customer, because what was being said was that we were training individuals with disabilities, and we had a well-trained workforce, you know, but not opportunities for them. And so we got to that place where we just kind of like that stability and predictability. This, what Lillian is describing, would be great rehab. I mean, when you think about what rehab is all about, theoretically speaking, this would be great rehab to look at the needs of the individual, those unique needs, the challenges, barriers, so on and so forth. And I think it was Lauren who mentioned earlier about job carving, you know, and I'm thinking about customized employment. That's when folks start talking about job carving, customized employment, to me, that's good rehab. That's the kinds of things, those are the things that we ought to be doing. Now, theoretically, that's it. That's what we need to be doing practically, because we got this practical side where we're trying to satisfy employers and business and industry and to meet their needs. And so this is a rich discussion. And I think we need to come back and talk about this, because this is real rehab.
I think that's a great point, because it really speaks to that, like, finding the niche where it works for both the employer and the employee. And I think just as a society, we've come to really value stability and working your 8 to 5 days a week, very consistently, 1 week of vacation off. But in reality, that's not how a lot of people with chronic illnesses lives go. Like I know for me, and I know that this is not uncommon in the chronic illness community, I wake up, I don't know how many functional hours I'll have a day. I don't know how much work I'll be able to do a day. So I'll do a weekly to-do list, right? I don't time block out my day where I say, oh, at 11 o'clock, I'll do this because I may be stuck in bed. But by doing a weekly to-do list, it works out. So it's just, like you said, customizing that employment and getting really creative and getting really innovative and just taking that time to really figure out what's the best fit, what's that best niche. Miss Susan actually put a really interesting article in the chat of when does a chronic illness become a disability? And it essentially says, when major life activities are, interfered with. So like includes a variety of cellular, biologic, and/or systemic bodily functions, as well as working, concentrating, processing information, communicating, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a good idea to keep in mind of when that chronic illness becomes a disability. However, we also have to keep in mind that because a lot of people with chronic illnesses don't identify with the disability, it doesn't matter if it's technically a disability. They're still not being identified because they're not thinking, oh, I'm disabled, so I'm not going to reach out to LRS, so I'm not going to reach out to OCD, so I'm not going to apply for a waiver because that self-identifying isn't there. That's not any fault of, the person who's chronically ill. Everyone is on their own journey and that's okay. But I think it's also a discussion that needs to be had on how do we reach these individuals? How do we adjust our outreach so we can get chronically ill individuals into the workforce because they can be such a valuable asset.
On that point of disability a year ago, I think they said the state, according to the records, has 70 disabled employees. And I bet none of those are falling into this category. And that's clearly a very, very low number. And we're not doing a very good job of identifying these people.
I would think too, like chronically ill I would think anyone dealing with cancer would fall into that category. And I mean, I have loved ones, if you would say you were disabled, they would kind of look at you like kind of strangely. But one of my clients actually had cancer and he was perfectly fine beforehand. And now his cancer is in remission, but he is still dealing with the outfall of the cancer side effects. It's affecting his vision and things like that. So, there's also that to think about, where that crosses the line, but is it really arbitrary? It doesn't really matter if we focus on the individual and, getting the job done the best way that it can get done by the best person that can. And sometimes that's not a person, sometimes that person is a person with a disability because, like you said, the problem solving and things like that. And it's just opening that door. It's not putting the person with a disability in a job where they're going to fail or where their absence is going to become a problem for the supervisor or the employer. And I think that's important too when we're trying to have this discussion with the employers. I think that their automatic reaction would be getting nervous that we're trying, oh my gosh, how am I going to get my job done? Is going to be in the back of their mind, no matter what we're saying. And that's not the case. The case we're making is we're not going to put someone in a job that can't do your job for you. We're trying to find the things about your company or your department where this person's going to be the best fit. We just want you to keep your minds open because we really think that you're overlooking these individuals that could be a key asset and not a hindrance.
Absolutely. And I think it's also about not putting disability in a box either of what disability is supposed to look like or what accommodations is supposed to look like. Just because I know that whenever we normally think of disability, it's not a disability that looks different by the day, right? It's not one that needs different accommodations by the day. And like you said, that line between chronic illness and disability can be really arbitrary. And so can our definition of disability as well, because everyone exists on a spectrum of able-bodiedness and disability. We know that there are some able-bodied people who can run the Olympics, and there are some able-bodied people who cannot walk to the mailbox. So I mean, like, but now we're getting into disability theory, and you don't want to get me started on that. So
Thank you so much, Lillian. I think I agree with Ken. It was a great discussion. It was even better than I suspected. And yesterday, after I sent out the agenda, I realized that I put myself on the agenda after you, and I really just wanted to like slap myself because I should never put myself on the agenda after you because you do such a great job. So we really appreciate it.
thank you for the kind words and for the awesome discussion.
Really great. So what I'm going to do, because we definitely want to end the meeting within an hour, I am going to, we'll just skip over my section because there's some other important points that we need to have done before the end of the hour. Particularly just the assignments to review the same report recommendations. I talked to Rachel Pollock yesterday, and she has agreed to come on for our May meeting. And so we'll talk about the pilot project. So to have DOTD, Division of Administration, and Department of Health try to make sure that all their teams can be on and just kind of share what they've learned through that pilot. I know there was some issues with the technical assistance grants with the federal, with the feds. So it wasn't exactly how we had anticipated, but we'll just, I know that they've learned some things. So it'd be good just for them to share what they've learned and what they're continuing to do in that vein. And then right now, if we can have our LRS, if you have any updates on anything in regards to your work with the state as a model employer, if you could share that now, that'd be great.
Bambi, I think Melissa is on. And so I think she wanted to share something with us.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ken. Just two quick updates. In the same grant that Bambi was talking about, there's also an LRS component where we're working with the Office of Behavioral Health just to improve our processes with that particular population. And we actually have a meeting on Monday with LRS and two of the LGEs in Baton Rouge and Homa, just to start talking about how we can just make that process better so that we can serve those customers better. But one thing that I wanted to say, we've been working tirelessly over the past, I guess, month. I think we're going to have PTSD over it. But we have been working on a Disability Innovation Fund grant opportunity. We don't typically apply for grants in VR because VR is just a huge grant. But we did have this opportunity to apply for a grant through the Disability Innovation Fund, which is basically a fund of money that states turn back. We turn back this year, we turn back half of our grant just because we don't have the state matching funds to draw those down. So this was an opportunity to get some of those funds back that we don't have to match. So we won't find out for many months whether or not that we have received this grant, but I wanted to give y'all just an idea of what we're planning. Hopefully, it's actually a consortium with Louisiana Rehab Services, Michigan Rehabilitation Services, Michigan State University, and Southern University in Baton Rouge. And we are targeting the racial, ethnic, minority, and other marginalized groups in STEM occupations, which for those of you who are not familiar with STEM occupations, that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. So the goal of the project will be to assist individuals in either obtaining employment or advancing employment in STEM occupations. So we're really excited about this possibility. And so you probably won't hear me talk about it for a while because we have to see if we get the grant, but we're going to be obviously preparing for this and hopefully looking forward to, this is a 5-year grant of some work because I think, as you all know, STEM occupations is very, very important. And so we want to do a better job in preparing our individuals with disabilities for employment in those types of occupations. So that's all I wanted to say. If anybody has any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer.
Hey, Melissa, I know we're not time crunch, so I'm going to just say this real quick. In Lafayette, there's a huge computer company, CGI, that is always hiring. And it's for, specialized computer, things like that. I never have qualified clients to place there, but I know, if we can get those kids right out of high school, some of the kids and train them, that would be a wonderful employer, and they are always looking. It's the openings are, and it looks like they're never filled. So I don't know, that might be down the line, but if y'all want to let them know, maybe they could come in on your discussion on how these people need to be trained, with a job coach or something like that, or just take a look at the positions. I just wanted to alert you to that employer.
Thank you, Lauren. That's actually very great information because we do need to get employers involved. If we get the grant, we will have different focus groups and things like that, and we do need to target some employers. So that's great information and a great point, because that's exactly the issue that we're having in vocational rehab in STEM occupations as well as other occupations, is we have employers coming to us needing employees, and we don't always have the right clients with the right skills for those jobs. So thank you. That's a great point, and you'll probably be hearing from us. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions from Melissa? And if not, do we have any other updates from LRS?
Bambi, I was just going to address Melissa as well. As a STEM agency, we hire engineers and geologists and technical positions. So you can just keep us on the list as well. If you do get the grant, we'd love to see what we can do to work with you on that.
Thank you so much, Ricky. We had to do this so quickly that I'm getting so much information I wish I had 3 weeks ago, but this is good. Thank you so much. And you're on my list. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other agency that does employment services that have anything to share? Okay, then we'll move on to our last item on the agenda, which is update on legislation to create the Office of State ADA Coordinator. The governor's package, this legislation is included in the governor's package, which the governor's package is basically, a set of, 10 to 20 bills that are like his, things that he wants to see done. Not that there's many other things that he wants to see done, but if you listened to his press conference yesterday, he mentioned it. It is something that we talked about a lot in this group in regards to ADA. It's House Bill 446. Representative Rhonda Butler is the author of that legislation. And basically it would be an office whose role is to help with the coordination and support of the implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Not an office that would be, it would be more proactive in like providing training, and helping to assist state agencies if they come into issues that are just not something that they're familiar with. And also maybe help to streamline some of our processes for accessibility and help coordinate and connect across agencies. As you all know, all of you deal with ADA, and you know that sometimes it's not, you may not have the power to do what needs to be done for an ADA accommodation. So this office could help across agencies to see that things are just improved in our state. And I don't know if you'll have any questions or comments about that. The office will be within the Division of Administration. And so we really stressed that it was important that this position have autonomy to be able to do what it needed to do without political influence, or, you know, that they would have any hindrance to them doing a job that serves the people of our state and our disability community. So that's just another point.
Bambi, would that report to the commissioner or somebody else?
It would be within the office, I mean, within the Division of Administration. Yes, so it would be under the commissioner. Yes.
So is this like what we were talking about? Even if like when the administration, like if it changes, this would probably be like a permanent office?
It
if
is
they
a
voted
permanent,
in?
yeah. And
Okay,
so
yeah.
it's gonna be a civil service position. So
Okay,
that's some protection for that, you know, so it can't just be, you know, like where it's a political will of who the
yeah,
appointee wants. Yeah, so it is gonna be a civil service position.
okay. And then I was wondering, is, you know, the advisory committee, is this permanent, or is this something that the governor started?
Are you talking about the same task force?
No, not the same, just the governor's advisory council on disabilities. Like
Okay,
the whole
so
office.
GACTA,
Have we always had advisory on disabilities? Or is
yeah,
this
there's
new to the
a state law
administration?
that establishes the Governor's Office of Disability Affairs, and in that law is that the GACTA, the Governor's Advisory Council on Disability Affairs, is the advisor to that office. So that's separate.
Okay,
That's
but
still going to exist.
this is,
This is different. This is going to be an office
okay, great.
focused on the ADA, whereas in
Okay.
our
Yeah,
office,
that's,
it is more on the political, you know, preference of whoever the governor is at that time. That's why I was against
right.
it being in a political office. And most people were
Bless,
too.
I mean, this is great. Yeah,
And also the continuity of having someone in there in a civil service position. One of the important, I was concerned about that because I wanted to make sure that we had the right person. And I'm not as familiar with civil service, but the way that so that is accomplished is us having like a really good like outline of like what are the roles and what are the experience and credentials we want of that person that is in that role. So selecting the right person is really important, I think, and then allowing them to do those things that are specified in that job description. Oh, and so Rosemary asked about the employment first and same legislation. So Rosemary, what the intention of the of the governor's office is to get this office set up and potentially, hopefully have that employment first and same legislation for next year. And honestly, like you all know, the work that goes into that, we've been having those subject matter experts who's been helping us. But really the work really requires at least one staff person probably because I mean, you have me and my staff, but we have so many other things to do. So potentially have maybe a staff person leading that could be within that office, state ADA office, and could do that work as well. Since it's so aligned, that's kind of been the discussion. But would appreciate feedback. What do you guys think? And just to add on to that, Rosemary, the reason for that this year, there's limited number of fiscal bills that could be filed by legislators. So there was limitation, and we already have the same task force established through executive order. So it wasn't as urgent to get that work going as it was to get this office established. So that was kind of the thought process behind it, that we continue to do the work and then just establish it in legislation next year.
I think it'll be really important too, just having that person on call, with making, supervisors feel comfortable, HR feel comfortable, and so that we have continuity between departments, between, agencies. I think it's necessary, and I think it's going to take a lot of, it'll actually help us get things done as opposed to talking about ideas. Somebody will have the authority to, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, let's get it started. So I'm super excited about it.
I agree, Lauren. And there'll be a website established, and so they could have a repository of just information, a centralized place where people can go for ADA, and if they need training, if there's trainings done, it could be open to our state agencies, also like our local governments could participate. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
And I think there used to be a grant or something for an ADA coordinator in states, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if anybody knows, but when I started at the business center, Lafayette Business Center, the person whose position I took had all of their files on the computer, and I still have a list of like what an ADA coordinator does and stuff like that. So if you want me to send them to you or somebody in your office so we can look through them and see, some of it might be outdated, but just to see how their work looked. I think it was more on a local area than what this will be, but it was interesting.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful. And I know we're a little bit over time, but I just want to put this bug in your ear for you to be thinking about it for our next meeting. I know I've kind of been operating as the chairperson and staff of the task force, but since we have everyone newly appointed, I really think it would be to our best interest if we had someone else to act as the chairperson. Myself and our staff in GOTA will still do the work behind the scenes, but I just think that it may be good to have someone else to kind of at the table initially, to communicate with a little bit more in deciding how we move the work forward. So those other 13 people besides myself who are on the task force, if anyone is interested in having to deal with me a little bit more, let me know if anyone wants to recommend someone to serve as the chair for the task force other than me. I would just kind of think about that. I appreciate it. And I'll just open the floor. Is there any other comments? Okay, our next